Telephone switchboard operators. For decades, every phone call required a human operator. When you picked up the phone, you'd hear, "Operator, what number please?" The operator would manually connect your call by plugging cables into a switchboard. At the peak in the 1940s, telephone companies employed over 350,000 switchboard operators in the United States alone. It was one of the largest employment categories for women. Then, in the 1960s and 1970s, automatic telephone switching systems were deployed. Within a few years, the job virtually disappeared. By 1980, most operators were gone. Telephone switchboard operation was skilled work. Operators had to memorize connection procedures, handle multiple calls simultaneously, remain courteous under pressure, and work with complex switchboard equipment. The job required training and offered career advancement. Many women worked as operators for decades. The technology that replaced them was automatic telephone switching, systems that could route calls electronically without human intervention. Direct dialing allowed callers to dial numbers themselves, and the system would automatically connect the call. AT&T and other phone companies began deploying these systems in the 1960s. The transition happened remarkably fast. In 1960, there were approximately 340,000 telephone operators in the U.S. By 1970, that number had dropped to 240,000. By 1980, it was under 150,000. By 2000, fewer than 30,000 remained, mostly handling specialized services like directory assistance and operator-assisted calls. The vast majority of operator jobs, over 300,000 positions, disappeared in just 20 years. For workers, the transition was devastating. Many had spent their entire careers as operators and had few transferable skills. Telephone companies offered some retraining, but many older workers simply retired early or left the workforce. Younger operators transitioned to other clerical jobs, but often at lower pay. An entire profession that had employed hundreds of thousands vanished because technology could do the job faster, cheaper, and without human intervention. Bowling alley pin setters. Before the 1950s, every bowling alley employed pin setters, usually teenage boys who sat at the end of bowling lanes and manually reset pins after each ball. It was hard, somewhat dangerous work. You had to dodge flying pins and bowling balls. During bowling's golden age in the 1940s, 1950s, tens of thousands of pin setters worked in bowling alleys across America. Then, in 1952, AMF introduced the automatic pin setter machine. Within 5 years, manual pin setters had almost completely disappeared. Pin setters would crouch behind the pins, wait for bowlers to throw their balls, then jump up, clear fallen pins, and manually reset the standing pins, or set up all 10 pins for the next frame. It required quick reflexes, physical stamina, and attention to avoid injury. Bowling alleys typically employed multiple pin setters working different lanes. The automatic pin setter changed everything. The machine could reset pins mechanically, return bowling balls automatically, and keep score. One machine could handle what a human pin setter did, working continuously without breaks, never getting tired, and never getting injured. For bowling alley owners, the economics were compelling. Machines paid for themselves quickly. AMF's automatic pin setter, introduced in 1952, was rapidly adopted. Brunswick introduced a competing model in 1955. By 1957, most bowling alleys in major cities had converted to automatic pin setters. By 1960, manual pin setters had become rare. The job that had employed tens of thousands of teenagers disappeared in less than a decade. For the workers, mostly young people who used the job for pocket money, the impact was less severe than for adults with career jobs. Many simply found other part-time work, but the job that had been a staple of working-class teenage employment vanished almost overnight, replaced by machines that worked faster and more consistently. Elevator operators. From the 1850s through the 1950s, elevators required human operators. The operator would manually control the elevator's speed and stopping position using a lever, announce floors, open and close doors, and assist passengers. In large cities, thousands of people worked as elevator operators. The Empire State Building alone employed 70 operators. Then automatic elevators with push-button controls were developed. By the 1970s, elevator operators had almost completely disappeared. Operating an elevator required skill. Early elevators had manual controls that required precise handling. Pull the lever too hard and the elevator would jerk. Stop too early or too late, and there'd be a gap between the elevator and floor. Skilled operators could stop elevators perfectly level with floors. They also provided customer service, announcing floors and assisting passengers. Automatic elevator systems, developed in the 1950s, used push-button controls and automatic leveling systems. Passengers could press a button for their desired floor, and the elevator would automatically travel there and stop level with the floor. No operator needed. The transition happened over about 20 years. In 1950, most elevators in commercial buildings had operators. By 1960, new buildings were being constructed with automatic elevators, and existing buildings were converting their systems. By 1970, operators had become rare. By 1980, they'd nearly vanished except in luxury hotels and a few historic buildings that kept them for ambiance. The job employed tens of thousands of people, mostly in major cities with tall buildings. For these workers, many of whom were older, the disappearance of their profession was difficult. Some found work in building maintenance or security, but many struggled to transition to other careers. An entire occupation that had existed for a century disappeared as technology made it obsolete. Ice cutters and ice delivery. Before refrigeration, ice cutting was a major industry. Workers would cut large blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers during winter, store them in insulated ice houses, and deliver them to homes and businesses year-round. Ice delivery men would bring blocks to homes daily or weekly for ice boxes, the precursors to refrigerators. In the early 1900s, the ice industry employed hundreds of thousands of people. Then electric refrigerators became affordable in the 1930s, 1940s. Within 20 years, the ice delivery industry collapsed. Ice cutting was grueling work. Using handsaws and ice picks, workers would cut blocks weighing 50 to 100 pounds from frozen lakes. The work was dangerous. Falling through ice was a constant risk. Ice blocks were stored in sawdust-insulated ice houses and delivered by horse-drawn wagons, later trucks. Ice delivery men would carry blocks into homes and place them in ice boxes. Electric refrigerators began appearing in the 1920s, but were expensive. By the 1930s, prices dropped, and by the 1940s, refrigerators became affordable for middle-class families. Refrigerators eliminated the need for ice delivery. Homes could make their own ice and keep food cold continuously without regular deliveries. The collapse was rapid. In 1920, nearly every American home used an ice box and received regular ice deliveries. By 1940, about 50% of homes had electric refrigerators. By 1950, that number exceeded 90%. The ice delivery industry went from employing hundreds of thousands to nearly zero in about 30 years, with the steepest decline in the 1940s. For workers, the transition was brutal. Ice cutters and delivery men were often older workers with limited education. Many had worked in the ice industry their entire lives. When demand collapsed, there were few jobs that needed their specific skills. Many struggled financially and never recovered career-wise. An entire industry that had existed for centuries disappeared in a generation. Lamplighters. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, city streets were lit by gas lamps that required manual lighting and extinguishing. Lamplighters would walk or bike through streets at dusk, lighting each street lamp with a long pole. In the morning, they'd return to extinguish them. Major cities employed hundreds of lamplighters. Then, electric streetlights that could be turned on and off automatically were introduced. By the 1930s, lamplighters had disappeared. Being a lamplighter was a reliable, if tedious, job. Workers followed specific routes, lighting dozens or hundreds of lamps each evening. The work required punctuality. Lamps needed to be lit before dark, and physical fitness, as lamplighters walked miles daily. Some cities used bicycles or small carts. Electric streetlights changed everything. They were brighter, more reliable, and most importantly, could be controlled remotely. Entire city blocks of lights could be turned on with a switch. No need for someone to manually light each one. The transition happened over about 20 years. In 1910, most cities still used gas lamps. By 1920, major cities were converting to electric lights. By 1930, lamplighters had become rare. By 1940, they had essentially disappeared, except in a few small towns that maintained gas lamps for historic purposes. The job hadn't employed massive numbers, perhaps a few thousand across the entire United States. But for those workers, the obsolescence was absolute. There was no similar job to transition to. Many lamplighters were older men who'd done the work for decades. Some found work in municipal services, but many simply retired or struggled to find new employment. A profession that had existed for over a century vanished completely. Human alarm clocks, knocker-uppers. In Britain and parts of the United States before alarm clocks became common, people employed knocker-uppers, individuals who would wake people up for work by tapping on their windows with long poles or shooting peas at windows. During the Industrial Revolution, when factory workers needed to wake at specific early hours, knocker-uppers were essential. The job employed thousands of people, often older women or men who were already awake early. Then affordable alarm clocks became widely available in the 1940s, 1950s, and the profession disappeared almost instantly. Knocker-uppers would be hired by workers to wake them at specific times. They'd make rounds through neighborhoods, tapping on bedroom windows, usually second-floor windows requiring long poles, until the person woke and acknowledged them. The job required reliability and early rising. Knocker-uppers themselves had to wake very early to wake others. The profession was most common in industrial cities where factory workers needed to start shifts at specific times. Missing work meant losing pay, so reliable wake-up service was valuable. Knocker-uppers charged a small weekly fee. Mechanical alarm clocks existed since the 1800s, but early versions were expensive and unreliable. By the 1940s, 1950s, cheap, reliable alarm clocks became widely available. Almost every worker could afford one. The need for human alarm clocks disappeared almost immediately. Within a few years in the 1950s, the profession vanished. People simply bought alarm clocks instead. For the workers, often elderly people supplementing income, the loss wasn't devastating since most had other income sources. But it's a striking example of how a job that had existed for decades disappeared almost instantly when affordable technology provided the same service. Human computers. Before electronic computers, computer was a job title, not a machine. Human computers performed mathematical calculations, often complex equations for engineering, astronomy, navigation, and military applications. During World War II and the early space program, thousands of people worked as human computers, many of them women. Then electronic computers were developed. By the 1960s, human computers had almost completely disappeared. Human computers would perform calculations by hand or with mechanical calculators. They'd work on problems for hours or days, computing ballistic tables, astronomical predictions, engineering calculations, and scientific data. The work required strong mathematical skills and attention to detail. During WW, women made up a large percentage of human computers, calculating artillery range tables and other military data. NASA and its predecessor NACA employed hundreds of human computers in the 1940s, 1950s, many of them African-American women, like those depicted in the movie Hidden Figures. They performed calculations essential to aviation and space exploration. Electronic computers changed everything. The first electronic computers like ENIAC, 1945, could perform calculations thousands of times faster than humans. As computers became more powerful and available through the 1950s, 1960s, the need for human computers evaporated. The transition happened over about 15 years. In 1950, human computers were still common at NASA, universities, and research facilities. By 1960, electronic computers were handling most calculations. By 1965, human computer positions had almost entirely disappeared. For the workers, many of whom were highly educated mathematicians, the transition varied. Some were retrained as programmers for electronic computers. Their mathematical skills transferred well to early programming. Others moved into teaching or other fields, but thousands of positions disappeared as machines took over a job that humans had performed for centuries. Factory weavers. Textile weaving was one of humanity's oldest professions. For thousands of years, weavers manually created cloth on looms. During the Industrial Revolution, mechanized looms appeared, but they still required human operators. By the early 20th century, textile factories employed millions of weavers worldwide. Then, in the 1960s, 1980s, fully automated looms were introduced. Within about 20 years, the number of human weavers collapsed. Factory weaving required skill. Operators controlled mechanical looms, threading them, adjusting tension, fixing breaks, and monitoring quality. A skilled weaver could operate multiple looms simultaneously. The work was loud, physically demanding, and required concentration. Textile mill towns existed around weaving factories that employed thousands. Automated looms, controlled by early computers, changed the industry. These machines could operate continuously with minimal human supervision, produce cloth faster, make fewer errors, and required only technicians for maintenance rather than skilled operators. The transition devastated textile communities. In the United States, textile employment dropped from over 1 million in 1970 to under 250,000 by 1990. Much of this was also due to offshoring, but automation was the primary driver. Even in countries that kept textile manufacturing, employment collapsed as automated looms replaced human operators. For workers, the impact was severe. Weaving skills weren't transferable to many other industries. Mill towns that had existed for generations around textile factories declined or died. Workers who'd expected lifetime employment found their jobs gone. Some mills retrained workers as technicians for automated equipment, but this required technical education many workers lacked. An industry that had employed millions was transformed into one needing a fraction of that workforce. Telegraph operators. For nearly a century, telegraph operators were essential to long-distance communication. They'd send and receive messages in Morse code, translating between text and coded electrical signals. At telegraphy's peak in the early 1900s, tens of thousands of telegraph operators worked for Western Union, railroads, news services, and governments. Then the telephone became dominant for person-to-person communication, and by the 1960s, 1970s, teletype and eventually fax and internet rendered telegraph obsolete. The profession disappeared in about 20 years. Telegraph operators required significant training. Learning Morse code and developing the speed to send and receive messages quickly took months. Skilled operators could send 40 to 50 words per minute. They worked in telegraph offices, aboard ships, at railroad stations, and for news services. The job was respected and reasonably well paid. Telephones began replacing telegraphs for personal communication in the early 1900s, but telegraphs remained important for business, journalism, and situations requiring written records of messages. However, by the 1960s, teletype machines, which could send typed messages directly without Morse code, were replacing traditional telegraphy. By the 1970s, fax machines and early computer networks further reduced telegraph use. Western Union sent its last telegram in 2006, but by then, the service had been a curiosity for decades. The profession of telegraph operator had effectively died by the 1980s. From employing tens of thousands in 1960, the number dropped to a few thousand by 1980 and hundreds by 1990. For operators, the transition was difficult. Morse code skills weren't useful in other professions. Some operators transitioned to telephone or radio work, but many older workers simply lost their careers. A profession that had seemed permanent disappeared as communication technology advanced. Typesetting and printing press operators. For centuries, printing required human typesetters who manually arranged individual metal letters to create pages for printing. It was highly skilled work, requiring literacy, attention to detail, and years of training. Linotype machines, invented in 1884, automated some of the process but still required skilled operators. Newspapers and print shops employed thousands of typesetters. Then, in the 1970s, 1980s, computer typesetting and desktop publishing emerged. Within about 10 years, traditional typesetting disappeared. Typesetters were craftsmen. Using linotype machines, they'd type on keyboards that would cast complete lines of metal type. They'd arrange these lines into pages, make corrections, adjust spacing for justified text, and prepare plates for printing. The work required technical skill and was well compensated. Typesetting unions were powerful, and the profession was considered secure. Computer typesetting changed everything. By the 1970s, computers could typeset text faster and more accurately than humans. Desktop publishing software, introduced in the 1980s, meant anyone with a computer could typeset documents. The skills that had taken years to master became obsolete. The newspaper industry was transformed. In 1970, every newspaper employed dozens of typesetters. By 1985, most had transitioned to computer systems. By 1990, traditional typesetting was essentially gone. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared in less than 20 years. For typesetters, the transition was devastating. Many were middle-aged workers who'd spent decades mastering their craft. The skills were useless in the new digital environment. Some were retrained in computer systems, but many lacked the aptitude or interest. Unions fought the changes, sometimes successfully delaying automation, but ultimately couldn't stop it. An ancient craft that had existed since Gutenberg disappeared in a decade. Bank tellers, partial elimination. For decades, every banking transaction required a human teller. Deposits, withdrawals, check cashing, transfers. Everything was done in person at teller windows. In the 1970s, major banks employed hundreds of thousands of tellers. Then, ATMs, automated teller machines, were introduced in the 1970s, becoming widespread in the 1980s. While bank tellers haven't completely disappeared, their numbers dropped dramatically, from a peak of over 600,000 in the US to fewer than 400,000 today, despite a much larger population. Bank tellers performed routine transactions, accepting deposits, dispensing cash, cashing checks, processing transfers, answering questions. The job required accuracy, customer service skills, and trustworthiness. It was often entry-level, but offered career advancement into banking. ATMs automated the most common transactions. Customers could withdraw cash, check balances, and make deposits 24/7 without a teller. For banks, the economics were compelling. An ATM cost less than employing multiple tellers and could operate continuously. The first ATMs appeared in the late 1960s, but widespread adoption came in the 1980s and 1990s. As ATMs proliferated, banks needed fewer tellers. They closed branches, reduced teller windows, and cut staff. The trend accelerated with online banking in the 2000s and mobile banking in the 2010s. Bank teller employment peaked around 1990 at over 600,000 in the US. By 2000, it had dropped to about 550,000. By 2020, fewer than 400,000 remained, despite significant population growth. The job hasn't disappeared entirely. Tellers still handle complex transactions and customer service, but it's a shadow of what it was. For workers, the impact was significant. Bank teller jobs had been reliable entry points to banking careers. As positions disappeared, competition for remaining jobs intensified, and advancement opportunities decreased. Many former tellers had to find work in other service industries, often at lower pay. Travel agents. For decades, booking travel required a travel agent. Agents would use specialized computer systems to search flights, book tickets, reserve hotels, arrange car rentals, and plan itineraries. In the 1990s, over 130,000 travel agents worked in the United States. Then online booking systems became available to consumers in the late 1990s. Websites like Expedia, Travelocity, and Orbitz let people book travel themselves. Within 10 years, travel agent employment dropped by over 50%. Travel agents provided valuable service. They had access to booking systems consumers couldn't access directly, knew details about destinations, could find deals, and could arrange complex itineraries. The job required training in geography, booking systems, and customer service. Many travel agents ran their own small agencies. Internet booking systems changed everything. Sites like Expedia, founded in 1996, and Priceline, founded in 1997, gave consumers direct access to flight and hotel booking. People could compare prices, read reviews, and book travel themselves without paying agent commissions. Airlines encouraged direct booking by offering cheaper fares on their own websites. The decline was rapid. Travel agent employment peaked at about 130,000 in 1998. By 2008, it had dropped to about 60,000. Today, fewer than 75,000 remain, many specializing in complex itineraries, luxury travel, or specific niches that benefit from expertise. For workers, the collapse was devastating. Many had invested in opening their own agencies, taking on debt for storefronts and equipment. As business evaporated, agencies closed. Agents who'd built careers over decades found their skills obsolete. The booking systems they had mastered were now accessible to everyone. Some transitioned to online sales or other customer service work, but many left the industry entirely. Film projectionists. From cinema's invention through the 1990s, every movie screening required a skilled projectionist. Using large film projectors, projectionists would load reels, ensure proper focus and framing, adjust sound, change reels mid-showing, and maintain equipment. Large theaters employed multiple projectionists working different screens. Then digital projection was introduced in the 2000s. By 2015, film projection had almost entirely disappeared, replaced by digital systems that required minimal human involvement. Film projection was skilled work. Projectionists loaded large reels of 35mm film, threaded them through complex projector mechanisms, ensured proper tension and framing, adjusted focus, and monitored showings. When films came on multiple reels, projectionists had to change reels seamlessly so audiences wouldn't notice. They also maintained and repaired expensive projection equipment. Digital projection eliminated most of this. Digital projectors receive encrypted files on hard drives or via internet. The projectionist essentially just ensures the correct file plays at the correct time, a process often automated. No threading film, no reel changes, no focus adjustments. One person can easily handle multiple screens. The transition was rapid. Digital projectors began appearing in the early 2000s but were expensive. By 2010, digital projection was becoming standard. By 2015, over 90% of U.S. theaters had converted to digital. Film projection essentially died in about 10 years. Theater chains often eliminated projectionist positions entirely. Where a multiplex once employed 3 by 4 full-time projectionists, it might now have one person handling all digital projection for 15-plus screens, often as just one of their duties. For projectionists, many of whom had decades of experience, the transition was brutal. Their specialized skills, threading film, maintaining mechanical projectors, timing reel changes, were worthless with digital systems. Some learn in digital systems, but many were older workers who retired or were laid off. A craft that had existed for over a century disappeared in a decade. Telephone directory assistance operators. For decades, if you needed a phone number, you called directory assistance, 411 in the U.S. An operator would look up the number and provide it. At the peak, tens of thousands of directory assistance operators worked for phone companies. Then internet search engines made phone number lookup easy and free. Smartphone contact management reduced the need further. By the 2010s, directory assistance had nearly disappeared. Directory assistance operators used specialized databases to look up phone numbers. They'd ask for the name and city, search the database, and provide the number. The job required good customer service skills, clear speech, and database search proficiency. Phone companies employed thousands of operators working round the clock. The internet made directory assistance obsolete. By the early 2000s, people could Google a business name and find the phone number instantly. Smartphone contact management meant people rarely needed to look up numbers. Their phones stored everything. Online directories like whitepages.com offered free what phone companies charged for. Usage of directory assistance collapsed. In 2000, Americans made about 6 billion directory assistance calls per year. By 2010, this had dropped to under 2 billion. By 2020, it was under 500 million. As usage plummeted, phone companies eliminated operator positions. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared in about 15 years. From a peak in the 1990s, Directory assistance employment dropped by over 80% by 2015. The remaining operators mostly handle automated systems or specialized services. For workers, the transition mirrored other operator positions. The skills were specific to the job and didn't transfer well to other work. Many directory assistance operators were older workers for whom the job had been stable employment. As positions were eliminated, they struggled to find comparable work. Parking meter readers and ticket writers. For decades, cities employed parking enforcement officers who would walk streets checking parking meters and writing tickets for violations. They'd carry ticket books and coin collection devices, walking miles daily to monitor parking. Large cities employed hundreds of parking enforcement officers. Then digital parking systems and license plate recognition cameras were introduced. Within about 10 years, the need for human meter readers dropped dramatically. Parking enforcement officers would systematically check parking meters to see if time had expired, check for other violations like parking in no parking zones, and write tickets. They'd also collect coins from meters. The job required walking long distances in all weather and dealing with angry motorists. Technology transformed parking enforcement in several ways. Digital parking meters that accept credit cards eliminated coin collection. License plate recognition cameras mounted on vehicles or fixed positions can scan hundreds of plates per hour, checking against databases for violations. Digital pay-by-phone parking systems eliminate meters entirely. Enforcement officers just check if a license plate is registered as paid in the system. The transition happened mostly in the 2010s. In 2010, most cities still relied primarily on human enforcement. By 2020, many had shifted to camera-based systems or dramatically reduced enforcement staff. Cities that once employed 100-plus enforcement officers might employ 20 to 30, with cameras doing most monitoring. Employment numbers are harder to track since parking enforcement is municipal, but estimates suggest a 40–50% reduction in parking enforcement positions in major U.S. cities between 2010–2020. For workers, the elimination was straightforward. As cities adopted automated systems, they simply hired fewer officers and didn't replace those who retired or left. The job still exists but employs far fewer people. For displaced workers, the skills didn't transfer well to other professions, and many had to find completely different work. These 15 jobs, from switchboard operators to parking meter readers, show how quickly technology can eliminate entire professions. These weren't minor occupations. They employed hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. They were considered stable careers. Workers trained for them, built their lives around them, and expected to work in these fields until retirement. Then technology arrived, and within 10–20 years, the jobs were gone. The pattern is consistent. A technology emerges that can do what humans do, but faster, cheaper, more consistently, and without breaks or salaries. Initially, the technology is expensive or imperfect, so humans remain necessary. But as the technology improves and costs drop, the economic case for automation becomes overwhelming. Businesses adopt it rapidly because competitors who automate gain cost advantages. Within a few years, an entire profession disappears. What's particularly striking is the speed. These weren't gradual transitions over generations. They were rapid eliminations over a decade or two. Workers who started their careers in these fields expecting lifetime employment found themselves obsolete in middle age. The human cost was enormous. Many workers in these eliminated jobs were older, had limited education, and possessed skills specific to their profession. When their jobs disappeared, they struggled to find comparable work. Some were retrained, but retraining a 50-year-old telegraph operator to be a computer programmer wasn't realistic for most. Many faced unemployment, forced early retirement, or downward mobility into lower-paying jobs. Some industries and unions fought automation, sometimes successfully delaying it by years, but ultimately they couldn't stop it. The economics were too compelling. A business that employed automated technology could outcompete those that didn't. Today we're seeing the pattern repeat with new technologies. Self-driving vehicles threaten millions of truck driver, taxi driver, and delivery driver jobs. AI threatens jobs in customer service, data entry, basic legal work, and even some creative fields. Machine learning threatens jobs in medical imaging interpretation, financial analysis, and many other white-collar professions. The lesson from history is clear. When technology can do a job more cheaply and effectively than humans, the human jobs disappear, and they disappear quickly. The question isn't whether automation will eliminate jobs, it's which jobs will disappear next and how quickly. The 15 jobs in this video are cautionary tales. Every one of these professions seem permanent and essential. Switchboard operators were necessary for phone calls to work. Human computers were necessary for complex calculations. Telegraph operators were necessary for long-distance communication, until suddenly they weren't. Technology doesn't care about workers' livelihoods. It doesn't consider the human cost of disruption. It simply makes certain jobs obsolete. Society has to figure out what to do with displaced workers, and historically, we haven't done it very well. As we move into an era of AI and advanced automation, millions more jobs are at risk. The only certainty is that jobs that seem permanent today may disappear tomorrow. Technology eliminates jobs overnight, and workers are left to figure out what comes next.